Please be seated. We'll learn for a few minutes and then we'll daven later. There's a very famous Gemara in Brachos, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, that many of us certainly be familiar with. It's the story of Rabbi Chananya ben Daisa, Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa. Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa was the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he went to visit his Rebbe and he wanted to learn from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he walks in, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's son, most appropriate to this story, to this Mishaberach that we just actually made for a little baby. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's son was very ill. He was deathly ill. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai turns to him, the Gadol Hador, turns to Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa and he says to him, I want you to daven for my son. And Rebbitzin, Yochanan ben Zakkai, overheard this conversation. And she said, why don't you daven for our son? This is just the Talmud. You're the one who should daven. You're the Gadol Hador. You're turning to him to daven. He's a student of yours. And so what did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai answer his wife? He answered, yeah, but he's domed to an Eved, a servant of the Melech. I'm compared to a cabinet minister. I'm in the cabinet. Who has better access to the president? The butler or the Secretary of State?
No.
Yeah?
No.
If I want access, you don't want to be Secretary of State. If you want access, you want to be the butler, who is on a personal basis in his own quarters, who's cleaning up right and sees him in the morning, sees him in the evening, and has that access. And so that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying. Sure, I'm a sar, I'm a cabinet member, but I don't get into the private quarters. He gets into the private quarters. He's domed to the Eved. Chanina ben Daisa was known as the Tzaddik Hador. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was known as the Gadol Hador. When it comes time to tefillah, who do you want to daven for you? The Gadol Hador or the Tzaddik Hador? You want him to daven Tzaddik Hador. Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say that was Reb Chofetz Chaim in his time. The Chofetz Chaim was the Chanina ben Daisa. He wasn't necessarily the greatest Gadol Hador, but everybody knew him as the Chanina ben Daisa. If you wanted anything, if you wanted access to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Rav used to say about the Chofetz Chaim, you turned to the Chofetz Chaim, you didn't turn to anybody else in that door. In that generation, it was the Chofetz Chaim. That's the way the Rav described the Chofetz Chaim. In 1930, we learned a lot about how to act from how Gedolim, how Masa Harav. What is Masa Harav? We learn halacha not only from textbooks, but we learn halacha from watching Talmidei Chachamim act. And then we really know. Textbooks are limited, but the real Torah Shebaal Peh is learned by watching the actions of real Talmidei Chachamim. That's called the Maaseh Harav. In 1930, the very famous Rabbi Yecheskel Abramsky, Zichrono Livracha, was arrested by the communists. And he was sentenced in court to 5 years of hard labor. Rabbi Yecheskel Abramsky was sentenced by the communists, by the Russians, to 5 years hard labor. And the word got out throughout the world. Here was a first-class, great Torah scholar being arrested on trumped-up charges and going to be put into labor. He would die, with no question about it. Internationally, the Jewish community went to work and put an enormous amount of pressure upon Russia to release Rav Yecheskel Abramsky. Rav Yecheskel Abramsky, the communists finally, the Russian government agreed, and under the international pressure of the Jewish community, released him. And he went from there, he was released, and he went to London. For many, many years, he was the Dayan of the Bezdin in London. Yecheskel Abramsky was the most famous of all the Dayanim in London. Before he went to London in 1930, he went somewhere else. On his way to London, he stopped in Berlin. Who was in Berlin at that time, in 1930, 1931, 1932? He had just earned his PhD at the University of Berlin. His name was Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rav. The Rav was in Berlin. And the Rav would never talk about this. Rabbi Shechter points out the Rav would never talk about this. But Rabbi Abramsky became very close to the Rav because the Rav was Mishares Rabbi Abramsky. Rabbi Abramsky arrived in Berlin and the Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, took care of every need of Rabbi Abramsky. Every need, his food needs, his lodging needs. The Rav never, ever mentioned a word to anyone about it. He said, yes, I knew Rabbi Abramsky. That's all he said. Rabbi Schechter says, he heard the Rav say, yeah, I knew Rabbi Abramsky. You never knew the relationship. Rabbi Abramsky's family knew the son of Rabbi Yechezkel Abramsky said, my father was Makir Tov his entire life. He held Rabbi Soloveitchik in great stead because he was always grateful for how the Rav took care of him in that little period of time that he was in Berlin. And without the Rav, I wouldn't have had that good experience I had in Berlin. He always felt this. And the son of Rav Abramsky told the world about this relationship. The Rav never talked about it. What's the Maisa Harav? When you do a good thing, what are you supposed to do? Keep quiet. You don't announce it. You don't go on loudspeakers and say, hey, you know what I did? The Rav never spoke about it. Never spoke about it. Never said a word. He just did the good work, and he could have taken great credit. He never said a word. Yeah, I know Rabbi Abramsky, and that's all he said. Tremendous Maisa Harav. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha,